Welcome back to Psychedelics Weekly. This is Joe Moore, joined by David Drapkin and Alexa Jesse. How y'all doing today?
Hey, Joe.
Great.
Good to see you, buddy.
Yeah, great to be here. Excited to be on the podcast with you both.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we got heaps to talk about today, Joe, and I think you're only going to be with us for kind of the first half.
Yeah, I got about 20 minutes, so let's do it. So we got all sorts of fun things to jump into. But David, what's first?
I first just want to say hey to Alexa. I think it's just your first time behind the mic, so welcome. Tell folks just a wee bit about you and your work here at Psychedelics today.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Alexa Jesse. I am the Director of Sales and Strategic Partnerships, and I've been here for about 5 months, going on 6. Time really flies. And I met Joe at the Bicycle Day conference in San Francisco in April, and we just hit it off from the bat, and I started following along and listening and was just really inspired by the work. And so happy to be here. Really just my goal is to connect our listeners and to really incredible brands in the space doing work to forward the movement alongside us. So excited to be here and share a little bit more about my journey. And I'm new-ish to the psychedelic space. I have about 4 years consulting in the cannabis industry and just learning so much every day. So I want to be here to also represent like the newer voices to the movement who might not really know exactly what's going on. There's so much news, as we'll get into later today, like every week. So excited to, break it down for all levels of people in the industry.
Awesome. And tell folks about your big project you're working on, Convergence, because I think there's an update as well there.
Yes. So I am kind of leading on our side for Convergence, our first in-person conference and festival that's going to be in Los Angeles, March 30th through April 2nd. We are working really hard behind the scenes to build an incredible event, expecting about 750 people. So it's going to be an intimate gathering with incredible speakers, workshops. We're going to have a really nice tea lounge, immersive art, music, 4 days, 4 nights. And early bird tickets are on sale, but that will end on Friday. And so we just encourage you to get your tickets now before the prices go up, and you can use code PTInsider10 for a 10% off discount from us to you.
Awesome. So yeah, the early bird ends on this Friday. That's the 25th. So we're recording today's Tuesday, 22nd, yeah?
Yes. So today, if you're listening on Friday the 25th.
Quickly. Awesome. All right. Beautiful. Thanks, Alexa. Okay. So while we've got Joe here, we want to dig into some of these federal stories that came out of the midterms. So once things settle down from the midterms, it seems to be 2 separate groups, hopefully working in harmony together, that are putting forward 2 separate entities that advances psychedelic research, psychedelic legislation and education at the federal level. The first one is the PACT Caucus. So it's Representatives Lou Correa and Jack Bergman, who are Democrat and Republican respectively. They're co-chairing the Congressional Psychedelics Advancing Clinical Treatments Caucus, PACT, PACT. So that's really focusing on exploring psychedelic research to alleviate the US mental health crisis. And they're not going to do any advocacy around decrim. So from what it looks like, they're saying we're not about law changes for adult use, recreational use, or decriminalizing. They're just focused on research and kind of funding for research and educating politicians about why it's time they said yes to funding research and kind of letting folks in science labs to do more of the actual clinical work.
It's an interesting one because it's so similar in a lot of ways to the Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, but also a bit different in mission. So I'm a board member at Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, and the whole objective is not even to reschedule substance yet. That's in time, but to just immediately open up science funding, like right now, so that we can then have better science to help us inform decisions around drug policy. But I appreciate all efforts. I hope eventually we can all kind of align so that we're not repeating efforts in places. But I love this. I love that there is a bipartisan bill by folks that aren't, as far as I can tell, these two aren't super duper radicals on either side. So like, perhaps there could be some mainstream support for this kind of thing, which is great. Did you see if Marcus and Amber Capone from Vets are involved in this particular bill?
I think they were involved in the second one that we're going to talk about, which is the Breakthrough Therapies Act. That was with Senator Cory Booker and Rand Paul. So I think that was more veterans focused and had reason for hope in the organization that Brett Waters is directing. So I think that one is talking more about kind of veteran suicide prevention and having more services in America rather than veterans having to go overseas to access psychedelics.
I'd wholeheartedly agree with that. And it looks like there is some movement around decriminalization in that it would reschedule some substances so that people accessing these substances wouldn't necessarily be violating the same laws and therefore be in a lower risk position. So I think that's amazing and obviously necessary. And there has been speculation that even if MAPS approves or gets MDMA approved as a therapy, and it's prescribable, it's not necessarily the case that the DEA will change that schedule status. So this looks like really good preemptive action that needs to happen regardless. So it's great stuff.
How long does it typically take when, an action like this gets passed or is occurring, like to see the results or the positive benefits? Do we know?
You've seen that, you've heard the phrase, it's like an act of Congress. So it really just means it takes forever. So it's important. What might happen is it gets stuffed in some big bill that everybody just agrees, okay, yeah, you can have this if I have that. It's a lot of horse trading. So it could go through, but then, how long does it take for it to become law and enforceable in a different way? I actually don't know. It's a really great question.
Yeah, I think these two bills, acts, are the next logical step from what happened a couple months back, where the Department for Health and Human Services said they were going to, look into a interagency task force around psychedelic medicine, kind of operationalization. So that was just a statement, say, we're going to look into it. So now that these two things are happening, it's actually like, okay, there's actually people on the ground in DC that are going to be actually saying, okay, how's it going? Looking into it. Tell us what are your updates and let us help you with that. We've got all the researchers and scientists here. And like Joe was saying, I think the quickest thing that's going to have the biggest impact is just to reschedule. I think it's just MDMA and psilocybin from Schedule 1 to 2. That's all you need to really just blow wide open research, and it can then start doing real-world research in the VA. So that would be massive, and it's just a game changer if that could happen. So I think it's just for that would be enough for success.
Right. And I think like what I'm told, because I'm a board member at Psychedelic Medicine Coalition, the most express route to make substantial movement is to actually educate senators, Congress people, and their staff regularly, and moving towards a really easy thing, which is explicit science funding for this stuff. And, one of the biggest problems is, where do we make cuts? Where do we pull back spend so we can dedicate spend here? And it has to be in like a science budget, because that's like the easiest way to go from here to there. So, that's the hard part, coming up with what's best to cut. I would have proposals, but, who am I? So what's next? Or anything else on this one?
Yeah,
before we jump?
I was going to say, I think just having that bipartisan approach and having veterans, first responders as the kind of target people being helped is just literally the easiest way right now. It's not going to help everybody in the world, but, just thinking of Rick Perry in Texas, he jumped aboard that movement because it's helping veterans in Texas. So it seems to be a good combination. So yeah, just to say, I think that helps just expedite it too. So yeah, I think the next piece we were going to go into, something that Alexa feels strongly about, because it's has some connection to your own experiences with pain with psychedelics. So it's a story of Jim Harris. If you want to just yeah, tell folks a wee bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. I think this news came out this week. This article about Jim Harris, who was paralyzed from the chest down I think it was a snow kiting accident in Chile, and it's really interesting and sad story. He is an active. He was a photographer, like for extreme sports, and mountaineer, and got in an accident. And what relates when I was reading his story is he talks about being paralyzed and going to a music festival about 8 months into his recovery, where he was, I think he was wheelchair bound, but he was disabled, not even having any function in his hands, and friends offered him psilocybin, and he was like, yeah, sure, and let me enjoy this music and be here. And he said, a little while into the trip, his fingers started to move and his legs started to move with the music, and he realized that he could move parts of his body. His words were really beautiful, like parts of his mind and body connected that hadn't connected in 8 months and since before the accident. And that began his journey. And I encourage you to read the article and learn more about him, because it's a really beautiful story. Mine is slightly different. I was in a very severe car accident in 2016, leaving a music festival, actually. And our car hit a utility pole right where I was sitting, and I shattered my pelvis, and I had 12 breaks in my pelvis and broke 2 vertebrae, tore my colon and my bladder, I ended up getting an infection in the hospital. I had to have surgery, and it was really scary. I was in the ICU for over 3 days, and my mom flew in. I had 12 stitches in my hand, a concussion, and I was not looking good, and I was not feeling good. And I was on every sort of drug med that exists: pain, muscle, nerve, and it honestly didn't do anything. Even the Dilaudid, it's like morphine drip, maybe for like 20 minutes. I was kind of high, and then they would try to move me, and it was just agony. And about 2 weeks into my recovery, my friends from San Francisco drove 4 hours to where I was in the middle of nowhere, California, and brought me weed edibles. And I, ate them and felt relief for the first time since I had been in the hospital. And it was the pivotal moment in my life I was like, why is this not given to people in these situations? And it wasn't, just the physical relief, but it was mental. I mean, I had gone through the most traumatic experience of my life. And that was the beginning of my, healing journey. And even in California, the doctors were like, do what you want, just don't tell us. And I just, that killed me. That they don't know enough to, to educate people on how to use this medicine for healing. And so anyway, after leaving the hospital, I just pursued my own learnings, and, we got myself off of all of the other meds probably within I think 6 months. It still took me. I had some serious injuries, but, all of the side effects of these medications, my stomach, not being able to go to the bathroom, and all the complications of nausea, and just the list, of side effects goes on. And using cannabis really helped me mentally. And when I got back to being a year and a half on disability, I was like, okay, I want to get back into work. I realized that I wanted to work for this movement and help to make it accessible for everyone. And, I have a long story about my journey with psychedelics as well, but it's really incredible seeing the research finally coming out, validating the effects on not just, trauma, mental health, pain, all of these things are related. And I know a couple of weeks ago we interviewed Court and his, that whole crew on their research that they're doing on pain. And I actually had a chat with him, and it's so fascinating the way we even think about pain. We don't really understand it. We think it comes from the source of injury, and it's really our mind, trying to protect the injury. And so anyway, it's just really great to see all this research coming out. But I think the anecdotal stories with Jim Harris is just as important, if not more important, so that we can just realize that this is real. He wasn't walking, and he's walking. So yeah, it's a really beautiful story.
I was actually following Jim Harris years and years ago, even before his injury. So I kind of watched the whole thing unfold on social media, and his art is spectacular, by the way. I just love it for whatever reason. So check that out. But I think Court actually interviewed Jim years ago for the Remap site, and I thought it was on Psychedelics Today, but apparently it was Remap. But yeah, Jim's a special character. The it takes a special person to come forward with that kind of story. That you know, it looked absolutely like there wasn't going to be much progress, and all of a sudden there was, and that's something we need to keep looking at. Yeah, a lot of people will go through pain treatments for years and years and years and not get anything back, and you know, sometimes people get function back, and there are techniques here, and it's not just that drugs are miracles. It's that, you know, the therapies are just potentiated super well by psychedelics when used in the right way. Yeah, so it's going to be amazing to see what happens here, and thanks for sharing that, Alexa. It's a big story.
Yeah, thanks for sharing your experience with cannabis, and I guess we'll save that your psychedelic story for another week. But yeah, I just wanted to add that I'm really excited by how psychedelic research, medicine, people's just real life experiences of what it does for them, how that is kind of pushing forward the whole medical profession around, let's think about integrative medicine and wellness and health, and stop kind of siloing mental health from physical health, you know, and pain from addiction, from you know, mental health as well. So we've just separated everything so much. Different medicines will do different things, but they're just looking at symptoms. So I think psychedelics have this transdiagnostic benefit that really shows that we are just one living organism. Everything is interconnected, and the brain is part of that interconnected system, but not all of it. Like, you just look at the GI tract. We're just one system, and our Western medical profession just breaks us down to our composite components, you know, and that's not going to work. So I think psychedelics are like, actually, let's just take a step back and reconceptualize what the human body is, and how that relates to, depression and anxiety and addiction, and to pain, all these things. So it's just massive. And I love that Jim is doing art, and I looked at the article. His wood cuttings are beautiful. The article's on a website, outsideonline.com, so you can just look him up, Jim Harris. And he also said that he's continually has a kind of an annual schedule of 2 high dose trips a year and 4 moderate dose trips a year, just to kind of make sure that he's nurturing himself and kind of regulating his, you know, his calendar throughout the year. So I just love that he's still using it. It's not just like this one hit wonder. It's something he's continually using just to calibrate all his components, body, soul, and mind.
And I did have a similar like macro dose a couple of years after my accident, and I remember I was like on a beach of like a lake in Northern California, and you know, I started to feel the effects, and it was the first time that I felt like my body like back to its strength, if not even more, you know, stronger than it was before, just after like years of physical therapy, and just emotionally also able to process that, like, holy crap, like what this body has been through, and like feeling, you know, gratitude. And so to your point of like holistic healing, these medicines, not that they're required, but they really are just like a quick, you know, a shortcut to tapping into our own healing ability, and just, I think, being able to really reflect on our journeys. And I love that, you know, that's what Court Wing was also saying. It's these macrodoses alongside microdoses is where they're seeing the benefits. And so to hear that, you know, I'm sure Jim has a huge part of that research too. And, you know, I do my own self-research, and I love it. It's amazing.
Yeah. And folks should check out that podcast that was with Dr. Joel Castellanos and Dr. Timothy Furnish about the paper they published in very high-end pain journal. And it was a series of 3 case reports, largely around macro and microdosing mixed in together.
That's so cool. I didn't know that, because I'm following some of the ketamine protocols for depression, and how they're mixing kind of high dose IV with low dose oral ketamine, and that low dose is kind of like a buffer just to extend and prolong the benefits of the IV ketamine. So that's cool. That happens.
Right. It's also a protocol for Spravato too. because Spravato is so expensive, and you can do a lozenge in between. So like it's the way to make it kind of work long term. Yeah, because we kind of know Spravato just doesn't work super long term, but in the immediate it can work okay for TRD.
Yeah. Actually, I think are you going to bounce now, Joe? Because I wanted to just drop a quick line about Spravato.
Go for it.
Yeah, I just saw it in. It's been a few different websites. I saw this in Josh Hardman's Twitter, so he's from Psilocybin Alpha, basically just talking about NICE, which is a British National Institute for Clinical Excellence, that basically gets to say, we will pay for this drug for the British people, or we will not pay for it because it's too expensive or it's not proven enough. So they've said for the third time, Spravato, esketamine is not cost effective to pay for the NHS National Health Service, and quite a few reasons really. It's just the data doesn't show that it's effective enough, and the REMS, the risk evaluation mitigation strategy, is just too costly to implement in a public health framework, and it just shows that, gosh, what's going to happen when we start to try and get MDMA-assisted treatment that's got potentially 6-hour sessions approved by NICE in England. So it's kind of food for thought, but also just shows that the way that Spravato was kind of bundled through by Johnson & Johnson, the data wasn't really there, and a lot of people question how on earth did they get it through so quickly, and it's a good question to ask.
Yeah. Always be suspicious when huge pharmas kind of make big bold moves like that. I'm hearing speculation of some really ugly stuff going on in the background from J&J too, trying to defend their position here because they've invested so much in bringing Spravato through, which again is just filtered ketamine, so it's only one-handed molecules, left-handed or right-handed or something. So it's fine. But yeah, to David, your point, I think the UK government saying things like it's just not a substantial improvement over ketamine, so we're just not going to use it. Like ketamine is just fine versus Spravato, and why would we pay 500x more?
Yeah, it literally is 500x. Yeah.
Is it really?
Yeah. If you look at how much a bag of IV ketamine, it's just you're talking dollars and cents. And Novamind did a study comparing IV ketamine to Spravato, and there was no clinical benefits whatsoever. But you can get Spravato covered by insurance in America, so in a sense, it could be more cost effective if you have good insurance. But most people wouldn't.
Right. Depends on who we're talking about, right?
Yeah.
And to where. Certainly more cost effective for J&J. And with that, I've got to run, but thanks for having me.
Hey, thanks, Joe. Great having you, man.
See ya.
And just saying happy birthday to Joe. We celebrated his birthday last week, and he just came back from a well-deserved birthday trip.
I think he won't mind. Now that he's gone, we can probably say how old he is, yeah?
Oh, I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll let you say it.
All right, Joe, we're going to say Joe hit the big 40, so he is now in his 40s, so congrats.
Yeah, send him some birthday love.
Yeah. All right, so just you and me, Alexa. We got lots more to cover. I think the next chat we want to do is around MAPS, and the segue that I had in mind was, before we talk about their phase 3, is actually some awesome clinicians and did some research on their phase 2 results. So from their previous phase findings that they did, a group of researchers, including Devon Christie, Will Sue, and Pam Crisco, and a bunch of others, looked at those participants in the phase 2 trial that had PTSD that also had chronic pain, and so then studied their scores, and it showed that actually the MDMA not only really helps people with their PTSD symptoms, and the majority go into remission, it also really helps them with chronic pain as well. And it was a kind of a separate causality too, so it's kind of a different pathway potentially. So a lot more work to do, but it's just fascinating. We're just talking about psilocybin for pain and kind of neurogenesis and being able to feel your legs and mobility. We're talking about psilocybin here, and ketamine. There's a lot of research around ketamine for pain. So it's just huge, and I think there's other studies looking at LSD and pain as well. So just pain just keeps coming up around psychedelics. So it's not just mental health.
Yeah, it's really exciting because I remember when one of the first times I talked to Joe when I was onboarding and telling him about, my pain and kind of how I still have, living chronic pain, and I've just learned like this is just me now. I can walk and I can dance, and I, just know I need to bring like a little grandma cushion when I go out to dinner, and learn how to adapt. And he was like, no, don't accept that. Because he knows what I'm learning now, like that. And it's really exciting. I just started at home ketamine therapy, and in the new year, I'm actually going to do MDMA therapy as well. And really just trying to be my own case study of like, okay, fine. Like, let's see what you can do. Medicines heal me. And I think to your point, and this study, what's really interesting is it is related to mental health and to the trauma. We store trauma in our bodies. We push it away. It's painful. It's scary. And, being in ceremony or in session, like really allows you to look at the pain in a way that's not painful, which is kind of what a magical trick.
Wow. So you kind of, look at pain in a different way. So it can still be pain, but the reaction to it or the relationship with it changes.
Yeah. And then, with what's actually happening in our bodies, and what's interesting with ketamine, and I'm what you were just saying about ketamine, and also with psilocybin, these macrodoses followed by these microdoses, it's like these changes in our brain. Like we have a lot of work to undo, these neural pathways. And so, I'm all for microdosing, and, think about, we drink alcohol on a regular basis for the most part, and it's kind of the same thing. It's this numbing effect, except it's like inverse. It's like we're, unnumbing. We're looking and feeling in a way that's healing.
Yeah. It's interesting. Whenever not all the time, but sometimes when I use cannabis, my body relaxes, I reconnect with my parasympathetic nervous system, and I also feel down the left side of my body just like trauma. And I think it just has to be from when I tore my meniscus in my knee, 7 years ago, and had orthoscopic surgery, like going through my knee, because I just literally feel from my waist down to my heel, it's just this oi, in a very Jewish way, like a oi. My whole leg just feels like it's kind of 10 years older than my right leg, and weaker. And it's interesting because my right leg I actually broke when I was 19, so 15 years before that, and it never healed. But there's something about that left side. It just feels like, it's almost like it feels like it's been severed, like it's not really part of my body. It just doesn't have the energy flowing through it. And I guess that's part of, what is energy and our soul, and, and just having that energy, like it doesn't flow through that side. So how do we get it to flow? And, do some yoga and stretching and a bit of dancing in the living room just to move the energy around.
And I mean, energy work, is another, it sounds woo-woo. My sister actually is just recovering from breast cancer. She's cancer-free, but she started doing energy work. And one of the unfortunate side effects of chemotherapy is that she is going through menopause, basically. And they don't know if it will end, but she gets hot flashes like almost every hour, and they're like really intense. And she was just telling me yesterday she was doing this energy work with this healer who is, who knows, somewhere else in the United States. And at one point, this woman is like, why do I feel really hot? Like, what's going on? And my sister was like, I'm having a hot flash right now. And she had never had one during a session with her. She's been working with her for over 6 months. And I've had amazing energy healing experiences alongside with acupuncture, which, it's this like, it's taking what you said, this holistic healing, to like another layer. There's like energetic, there's other stuff going on that we can't see. And I think that's also why psychedelics are so incredible. And yes, the science is important, but you hear about people having psychedelic experiences like on DMT, and everyone's seeing the same thing. Like, how do you explain that? And I just personally think we can't yet, but hopefully, as we're talking about earlier, getting money and funding for research will allow us to start to really dive into to the metaphysical of it too. Like, what is really happening? What are we seeing? What are we tapping into?
Yeah. I'd love to see some of that naturalistic research, because I think clinical trials and randomized controlled double-blind trials are, they're not going to build in energy work into their
Right.
treatments, because no companies are going to try and get a patent on on energy healing, so no one's going to do it. But yeah, I'd love to know that. Different
Me too.
modalities, and even acupuncture. In England, actually,
Mhm.
acupuncture has been approved by the National Institute of Clinical Excellence as a kind of billable modality, because it's been proven. So yeah, acupuncture is working on meridian lines.
Right.
Isn't woo-woo. It's being paid
Right.
for by national governments.
Yeah, I just started getting acupuncture, and actually it was really interesting. So I had my first at-home ketamine treatment about 2 weeks ago, and it really was a reboot. Like, even just immediately, like as I started kind of coming down, I felt motivated. I have like been nursing a shoulder injury for the past like 6 weeks, and I haven't worked out and I haven't stretched, and I've been just like really lazy. And I got out of that ketamine treatment and was like, book an acupuncture appointment, book PT, like start stretching, like just start moving. And I found an acupuncturist within my health insurance network, which that's a whole nother story, but she's amazing. And she has like crystals that she uses. She has like this like a energy like biomat. I don't even know, but I get on that table and I'm buzzing. I mean, she puts needles in, and it's I love that the science is there and that, insurance is covering it. I wish massage therapy was in there, because as a pain relief modality for me, massage is by far the most powerful, and it's so unfortunate that it's so manual and it's so expensive. But we gotta pick our battles, I guess, and use the tools that we have.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I love how much you're listening to yourself and giving yourself what you need. I think I need to try a bit of that myself, to be honest.
I know. My question to you is like, what is going on with your left leg, David? Do you know?
I haven't thought about energy healing. Yeah, because there's definitely trauma there, and I do yoga every morning. But yeah, I think I really need to kind of go deeper into that left side of my body, like what story it's telling me, for sure.
Yeah. Keep us
All right.
posted.
Yeah. Stay tuned, folks. David's left side of his body. All right, so we should move on. Loving the this is what Psychedelics Weekly is for. If folks want to check out that article we were just talking about, it's in frontiersinpsychiatry.org. So frontiersin.org. And the article is called MDMA-assisted therapy is associated with a reduction in chronic pain among people with post-traumatic stress disorder. And that was going to be our segue, Alexa, to talk about the MDMA-assisted treatment phase 3 updates from MAP. So they're basically saying, not that the data is available yet, that will come, I think, Q1 next year. And then, Q3 next year, they're going to submit their new drug application to the FDA and hopefully get commercialization Q1 2024. But what they have announced this week is that they have completed the interventions and the data capture with their final participant, which was number 121. And so that's in their phase 3B trial. So they finished phase 3A, I think it was last year. Very promising results. Those are the words we have to use. Very promising, shows good potential, deliberately cautious. So they kind of replicated that, but actually two really interesting changes that they made in this phase 3B trial. They also included people that had moderate PTSD, not just severe. So it'd be really interesting to see, how do they respond? Do they respond to a lesser extent or a greater extent? And I don't know, but that's more real world, isn't it? When you start thinking, you don't just take the sickest people and then give them your medicine and say, oh, it really helps them. Let's just actually work with people that have more mild or moderate or more kind of contraindications and more complex social realities, because that is exactly where the medicine is going to be used when it gets commercialized to the masses. And then the second thing they changed in the phase 3B was 50% of their participants were BIPOC identifying. So that's trying to correct, mistakes that have been acknowledged in the past, that just there was not enough inclusivity of non-white people, and so that they're trying to correct that. So that's really awesome that they've hit that milestone, and can't wait to see the data, because this is obviously the biggest thing in psychedelic science ever. So they're kind of just moving it forwards.
Yeah, that's really incredible. Good to hear that they're like able to make changes and, you know, improvements as they move along. I'm really curious to see what it says too.
Yeah, yeah, big time. So, you know, we'll keep you updated. So it's hopefully Q1 next year is when we'll get the data back and we can geek out there and probably bring some MAPS folks on to talk about it. But yeah, keep up the good work, MAPS. Really appreciate what you're doing. And I think the next story we had is talking about Finland. So big shout out to our colleague Johanna. So she actually had a birthday as well today. No, tomorrow, which is the 23rd. Happy birthday, Johanna. So she's from Finland, lives, I think, in Totnes in Devon. Hope she doesn't mind me saying that. So this is coming from Finland. And for the first time ever, there's going to be some psychedelic research happening in Finland, which is fantastic. Just, you know, the more countries it happens in, the better, the more the education is spreading and people are hearing about it and governments are seeing it. So this was a partnership between Clairvoyant Therapeutics, which is a Canadian drug company, partnering up with the Finnish medicines agency called Fimea. And they're going to do a study using psilocybin to treat people with alcohol addiction, so alcohol use disorder. So really, you know, massive development in European trials. You know, we've got Awaken already doing ketamine for alcohol use disorder, and other organizations using mescaline for alcohol use and other compounds. But I think psilocybin really is probably the most, I think, trans-diagnostic, trans-therapeutic compound that could probably have huge benefits for all kinds of conditions, you know, so pain, addiction, mental health. It's really phenomenal, I think, what psilocybin can do. So it's great they're going to be using that there. And it's saying that they're going to do this, I think it's a phase 2 trial, if I remember. They're going to have 50 patients in Finland, and then the other 110 patients they'll use in clinical sites in Canada and Bulgaria. So maybe it's the first Bulgarian clinical trial with psychedelics as well. I don't know. I didn't see an article saying that, so maybe it isn't. But yeah, it's great to see that these countries are, you know, I guess it's less expensive to do clinical trials and have contract research organizations kind of set up shop. It's great to see them, you know, doing it in those countries. So congrats.
Yeah, it's really exciting to just see the different like pairings of psychedelic and, you know, mental health or disorder in research. I think that the diversity is exactly what we need to see, you know, maybe one is more powerful or beneficial for a specific use, or it's, you know, I'd love to know if it's like independent to the person. Like maybe for me, psilocybin is better for pain, or, you know, OCD or whatever my tendencies are. So yeah, that's really awesome to see just weekly, like new, you know, studies, and can't wait to see what comes of it.
Yeah. And especially, you know, I've got some close friends that, you know, definitely meet the criteria for alcohol use disorder. You know, they abuse alcohol and, you know, it gets kind of messy sometimes. So I'm really hoping that either they can access ketamine. That's available now. You know, we just did an IG Live with Nushama in New York because they have a partnership with Awaken for their care protocol to be used for people with alcohol use disorder in New York City. So I'm just really happy about that because I'm hoping people I know can kind of get help and go to Nushama. But yeah, just thinking about psilocybin, I think there's massive potential there for addiction, and the trials that Johns Hopkins and Matt Johnson are doing with psilocybin for smoking cessation. I think they're phase 2 as well, and that's got government funding, I think NIDA funding. So just massive potential here. Like, how many people here die of alcohol and cigarettes a year? You know, in my mind, I think it's around 250, 300,000 Americans a year are dying of smoking, tobacco, and of alcohol. So fucking massive stuff.
Yeah. Well, in addiction, I also have someone very close to me that is an addict, and my self journey, you know, being just even someone who loves someone who is struggling with addiction, it feels like a disease that will never end, you know, like also, you know, I'm sure everyone here knows someone who they love who has cancer. It's like, it's awful. It's such an awful disease, but in a way it's like, okay, it ends at some point, hopefully in one way or another. I know it sounds kind of morbid. They heal or they don't, but with addiction, it just, you want to have hope, and you want to, but it's a struggle. It's like really endless struggle. And I love hearing stories. I was speaking with, I'm just trying to look up her name, Talia, from Beyond.
Oh, Talia Eisenberg, yeah.
And she has an incredible story. And I hope that it's, maybe we'll let her share it herself, but she got into the space, ketamine, because it healed her of addiction. And she had been in and out of rehab and nothing was working. And she just told a beautiful story. And it similar to mine, it inspired her work because it's life-changing. I mean, it's really life-changing for the individual and for families. And, addiction is such a family illness, which really mental illness, it's a family illness, and it's really impacting our country. I think to your point, like it's all connected. Pain and depression, and even people getting hooked on pills and alcohol can stem from physical pain. And then, it turns into addiction. So there's all sorts of ways that psychedelics can kind of end that cycle. So it's just so exciting to finally see the world like listening and looking and watching.
And actually, just talking about that, I should have mentioned there's an organization called Apollo PACT. So it's APOLLOPACT.org. And I guess the director of that nonprofit is called John Costas. He's a friend of mine in New York City, and he's been getting a lot of media coverage lately on, CBS and 60 Minutes. He used to actually be a news anchor himself, so he developed alcohol use disorder, and he was patient number 1 in the NYU Langone psilocybin trials for alcohol use disorder. He was literally the first person they dosed. And he went in, tried everything, been to rehab, nothing worked. And then he had 1 dose of psilocybin, and literally he hasn't drunk since then. So he then started Apollo PACT, and they're part of the things we spoke about before with Joe as well. I think around the Breakthrough Therapies Act, I think they're involved with that piece, or the other one, the PACT Caucus. I can't remember which one. So yeah, just having someone with that personal experience, just like you've been talking about your personal experience and Jim Harris and his personal experience, you can't ignore that. Yeah.
Right.
And these are, if they are in clinical trials, they're just one of 100 or people there. But when they actually get in front of a microphone or write an article, people listen to a podcast, then you can't ignore that kind of qualitative narrative of lived experience. It's just amazing.
Totally. And when I first got into the cannabis industry, I was marketing director at a dispensary, and I was on the floor a lot, bud tending. And the anecdotal evidence is it's like the research just needs to catch up. Like, I have no doubts. I mean, people coming in who like weren't sleeping or on all sorts of sleep meds, and, cannabis helps them. And, Victoria did an interview a couple of maybe a month ago about, I forget who she interviewed, but about storytelling and the importance of storytelling. And that's really what it is. It's like these stories are real, what people are experiencing. And I'm excited to see what comes out of this one specifically relating to addiction, because it's something that people just struggle with so much. And it seems cureless, like AA is, it's antiquated, and I know it works and people have healed through it, but it's nice to have another alternative.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical about AA and 12 steps. I think it works for some, but I won't go into that here, but feel free to email me if you want to hear my true thoughts. All right, so moving on, we're staying in Europe for this next story, and this is about Germany. The article that we found is from the Mind and Brain Institute. So this is an announcement that the German government is going to be funding some psilocybin research. So it's a phase 2B trial conducted by the Central Institute for Mental Health in Mannheim. And they're doing that in partnership with the Mind Foundation. You may know that's a husband and wife dynamic duo, Henrik and Andrea Jungerberler. So the German government has donated, or is investing, choose your word, 2 million plus, I think 2.5 million euros to do this phase 2B trial. So again, it's just building on what we already seen, like with the British government investing in the Awaken trials for alcohol use disorder, and NIDA in America investing in the psilocybin for smoking cessation trials. It's just another government saying, we need help, we need new treatments, we want to help this kind of save lives quicker, so here's some money just to get it working. So it's much harder to deny that compared to, say, just someone who's saying, I've had this experience, or we want to make money doing this play. But when it's actual government funding through an institute of mental health, it's kind of just groundbreaking stuff. I'm loving it, seeing it happen.
Yeah, me too. And I think, for the average person who's maybe not as versed in psychedelics or is averse, seeing these research studies or, the funding being, put towards this research, I would imagine it opens people up to their own education and their own maybe experimentation and curiosity, which I think is so important. When people ask me about psychedelics, I'm always like, you kind of just got to experiment, obviously, like, learn and educate yourself and set and setting and integration and all the things. But really, it's like, start small and try it, and that's kind of, I think having this mainstream, headlines and just the funding is just huge for people for normalization. So that's a huge step as well.
Yeah, that's a good word. And just normalization, when you've got government supporting it, and
right.
You really kind of, because they would not do that if they weren't convinced that this is like really, really important work.
Right.
Yeah, good point. All right, so we got time for one more story, and this is about LSD. So we don't talk about that enough, for sure. And I don't know how much you kind of know Amanda Fielding, Alexa, or the Beckley Foundation, but I'm a huge fan of who she is and what she's been doing for half a century now, pretty much.
I recently got connected through Joe relating to Beckley retreats, but I don't know too much. So share a bit more about what they're doing.
Yeah, you got it. Beckley retreats is awesome. They've got Beckley has this ecosystems approach to having multiple companies in different verticals that complement each other, which makes a lot of sense. And they announced, this was in Benzinga, I saw this article. They announced 3 new studies that they're going to do around LSD, and with different partners for each one. So the person behind all of this is Amanda Fielding. So she's the top person at Beckley. She's been there for decades, and she's really famous from the 60s and 70s, and being one of the original advocates and proponents of using psychedelics for healing, as well as for spiritual growth and meaning. So LSD is kind of really her favorite psychedelic, so it's great to see that she's doing this. So the first study will assess the brain changes that take place during the mystical experience, and that is with King's College London and UCL. The second study is a collaboration between Amanda Fielding and physicians at the University of Basel in Switzerland. So that's where I think the first LSD research happened, with Albert Hofmann. And that's examining the therapeutic potential of microdosing LSD for the treatment of apathy and depression in patients with Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative conditions. And then the third study is co-led by Beckley and Cornell University, using advanced optical imaging to investigate how LSD alters cerebral blood flow and the connection between neurons and their associated network of blood vessels. So something I know about Amanda Fielding, because she was on a podcast with Ethan Nadelman, and she was talking about what she, I think, used to do. I'm not sure if she still does, but you can actually kind of tap the blood flow in your brain, and it's called tapotement, I think, and that's literally just kind of tapping the blood in your head and brain just to change the pressure within in your brain. So this third study that they're doing with Cornell, I guess it's going to tap into that, like what's the relationship between neurons and the blood vessels in your brain, and how does LSD affect that? Because that's her lifelong mission. It's using LSD and kind of blood pressure and blood in the brain. So it's great to see her life's mission really coming into fruition after all these years.
So this research is specifically studying microdosing LSD for Alzheimer's. Do you know if she has a, personal story relating to Alzheimer's or just?
Oh, I don't know actually.
Yeah, I'd be curious. It's interesting. LSD is one of my favorites as well. I should chat with her. But I also recently chatted with the company First Person. Chris Clausen and his brother founded the company, and their father and grandfather have or had and have Alzheimer's. And I guess they have like genetic predisposition. There's a specific gene for Alzheimer's, and they started to do all this research. And that was the first that I had heard. They said after all this research, realizing like mushrooms could really help, they actually dosed their father, who was, gone, as they explained it to me, and that he came back for like a couple hours. He was there, and there were moments when he would be using mushrooms that he would just be present again. And then, so it's so fascinating. And, Alzheimer's is another one that's just so painful for families, and especially that it seems to be starting younger and younger. So that's so exciting to see, especially with microdosing too, because it's very feasible. And with LSD, I'm just curious what will come out of this one as well. So it's so interesting to see all the different angles being taken.
Yeah. And you just made me go down a minor rabbit hole. So I've just Googled who's the actor from Thor, and it's Chris Hemsworth. So you may know him. Very good-looking young man. So Chris Hemsworth was reading the news. I don't know where I bloody saw this. It was on TV. It must have been an advert for a TV show, because I don't really look at TV stuff much. But it was saying that he was doing some TV show looking at, his blood tests and, health risk factors. And it came back with some pretty, it's scary and sad news that he has a much higher risk of developing Alzheimer's, because both his mum and his dad have a gene that I think increases his probability of getting dementia, Alzheimer's. I think Alzheimer's are by 8 to 10 times than the average person. So literally just watching him get this news live on air, being recorded, was pretty powerful. And so it's. My grandmother had Alzheimer's, and she had it for 8-9 years, and it just destroyed her slowly, day by day. And just watching her, lose everything and forget who we were and not be able to do anything herself. And if there's a way of slowing that down or preventing it, and I think there's so much around psychedelics that are neuroregenerative and kind of neuroplastic that can help, with TBI and dementia. The neurocognitive kind of deficits, just huge research. I wish we could just do more of it now. And I guess that's part of what we were talking about in the beginning. If it's rescheduled to, at the very least, Schedule 1, then all this research can happen a lot more easily and affordably, and a lot more of the actual supply of the scheduled drugs needs to be made available and permissible to use by DEA as well. That has to happen at the same time. So it's literally infuriating that it seems to be that there's all this research that is starting to happen, but there's just still so many roadblocks that the governments have set up because of the failed war on drugs, that it believes that psychedelics are all very harmful and have zero therapeutic benefit, whilst at the same time the FDA is giving them breakthrough therapy status, and governments are funding it, all these studies, because there's nothing else that works. It's just, we've reached that crunch time where we just have to call out politicians for these laws that have been created decades ago that were racist and just culturally and socially influenced, not scientifically balanced. And it's just time to kind of rewrite this. So I guess it's coming back full circle to what we were talking about with Joe, that it's just time to have these educated, mature discussions and make some brave decisions, because that's what you're there for, leaders, not just to follow along. To make bold, brave decisions is actually going to make a difference. That's why you're there.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you for that. What just happened?
No, I think it's really powerful, and just one touch point on the genetic testing, and that I also have a genetic predisposition to breast cancer, and discovered that when my sister got diagnosed. And that's where I want the research to go. I want to join a trial, like what will trigger breast cancer in me, what can help me prevent it. But I'm like 80% more likely to get breast cancer than a woman next to me, and that's actually an Eastern European Jewish. I don't know if you're familiar, David, with the BRCA mutation, but I'm not sure why. But it's a whole nother conversation. But with the Alzheimer's, this gene was APOE4 is what these guys were talking about. I don't know if there's more than one Alzheimer's gene. I didn't even know there was one for Alzheimer's, but that's actually so incredible that we're starting to, research is starting to show like, oh, you are predisposed for this. The next step is like, maybe certain meds aren't great for you, or certain things, are triggering. And that's where I hope, research will get to really study, even within psychedelics, like, can psychedelics prevent or reduce, I've read about diet being able to reduce, your genetic predisposition, which is really fascinating. So anyway, yeah, there's, endless topics to research, but at least there's movement. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. And I also really like that you're bringing up preventative medicine as well, because a lot of the research trials are curative.
Yeah.
You've got this diagnosis, you have these symptoms, you meet this criteria. But what about preventative, especially when it comes, to mental health issues or eating disorders or addiction,
Yeah.
or breast cancer or Alzheimer's. I really feel like psychedelics have that preventative kind of potential around so many different conditions that we're just not tapping into. And yeah, I think we've seen, anecdotal, naturalistic, people sharing their own findings about how psychedelics have helped them with so many different conditions, and managing it. It's just not to tap into that, but yeah, I'm also really excited about it. I'm angry on one side and I'm excited on the other, so it's good to balance those two out. Wow, so we've gone on a little bit, haven't we?
Yeah, it's really nice chatting. It's mostly positive, I think, the news coming out, so hopefully we just can keep sharing more good news.
Amen.
More progress.
All right, well, I think that's time to say cheerio, folks. So this has been Psychedelics Weekly with David Drapkin and
Alexa Jesse. Thank you all for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Cheerio. God bless.